This is Tommy's Outdoors 119, and our guest today is the one and only Megan Rowland. Megan is a deer management officer for NatureScot. NatureScot is Scotland's nature agency. And before that, she was a surveyor for RSPB Scotland, where she surveyed all species of Highland birds, from gulls to eagles, like she says on her website. She still helps with bird ringing. She's also a volunteer for the Scottish Wildlife Trust and local Raptor Study Group, the Scottish Mink Initiative, and the British Red Cross. She's also a founding member of Scottish Crofting Federation's Young Crofters. She's a young ambassador for the Highland branch of British Deer Society and a Lantra Scotland Game and Wildlife Industry Champion. Like, this is like a very impressive resume. And I'm really excited that I was able to bring you my conversation with Megan. Without a doubt, she's an expert in land management and deer management. Oh, I forgot to add, she's also a deer manager, obviously, and hunting guide. So she takes folks out hunting for deer. So truly expert person, and this is quite impressive, everything that she already achieved. Folks, before we go any further with that, I want to mention that this is our private conversation, just two friends talking. So views and opinions are not reflecting in any way, shape, or form views and opinions of NatureScot and so on. And we, Megan will do the disclaimer herself during the podcast, but I just want to clear this out, knowing that some of the subjects we talk about are quite heated. And obviously, I think this needs to be stated. So this is our private conversation. Folks, and if you enjoy those private conversations, this type of content that I'm giving you, producing here, please rate the podcast. 5-star rating. You can rate the podcast on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. This is great help for me and for the podcast. And obviously, if you want to go the extra mile and support me personally and my work, you can do so by buying me a coffee, because I edit those episodes very early at night in the morning. It's like 5 a.m. in the morning, literally, or late at night, although staying late at night is not healthy. So I'm not trying to not do that, but sometimes, just to bring you an episode, I stay late. So coffee is helpful, so you can buy me a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/Tommy'sOutdoors. The link in the description of the show. Big thank you for all of you who already bought me a coffee. And you can also visit Tommy'sOutdoors.com. You can find not only all the episodes of the podcast there, but some other goodies, blogs. You can buy t-shirts and hats and other stuff. So visit Tommy'sOutdoors.com. Buy me a coffee, leave the 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple. And now, without any further delay, deer management and land management with Megan Rowland. Megan, welcome to Tommy's Outdoors. It's been a while. I was waiting for this podcast.
I know it's been a wee while. It's been a few months in the planning, but yes, happy to be here.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. We're finally here, and we're gonna talk about all things deer in Scotland and nature. Listen, I know for a fact that many people expecting this podcast and waiting for this podcast, and when they read the title, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna listen to this. So that what I'm trying to say, that many people know who you are. You have a very strong social media presence, but many people don't know who you are. So for those few who don't know who you are, would you mind to give you a little bit of introduction, who you are, what you do, and you can also incorporate a very important disclaimer into that introduction that everything that I said is my opinion.
Yeah, I think that would be quite a useful one. So, anyone who kind of knows me knows that I've worked as a professional Highland deer stalker up in the county of Sutherland, so pretty much the very north of Scotland. So I've done that for coming up for about 6 years now. But in this last couple of years, I've also started working with Scottish Government as well, part of NatureScot, which was Scottish Natural Heritage. So big disclaimer, all opinions and thoughts are very much my own. And stuff that's kind of, not that I imagine there'd be massive deviations in kind of worldview, but yeah, I feel it's probably one of those things we've got to add in for the sake of keeping everybody happy.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, I worked in land management sector for the last decade now, at least. So it's started out doing sort of conservation work, and I've found myself kind of oftentimes at the end of a rifle. So it's a bit of a journey, but quite an interesting one.
And how did you get to do what you do? Because this is like I have like a privilege of interviewing people who have a dream jobs. So I always have to ask, like, how did it happen that you have this dream job?
Yeah. So I mean, I started out, like I said, working in the conservation sector and wanting to kind of go into that line of work, and started out doing environmental science and very much kind of following a kind of, I don't know, traditional kind of route into it. I got about 18 months into a university course doing environmental science and thought, this is just not the direction for me. Just wasn't the right fit at the time. So thought, right, okay, I'll go and do some volunteering work. I'll, just get experience to find out maybe what I want to do before I commit to anything. Because, you come out of school, you've got no idea really what the workplace is like. So, right, we'll do that. Ended up doing a lot of volunteer work with RSPB Scotland, with Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, with various other people doing lots of ecological surveys and that sort of thing. During my time with RSPB Scotland, my then boss took me out deer stalking, and it's just one of those things that just kind of came about. I'd said one morning, quite fancy seeing, the whole process through field to fork. Kind of, could I do it myself? And he said, okay, well, we'll get that arranged. And we went out, ended up spending the day on the hill, stalked and shot a deer, and my little brain went, this is something I could do more of.
But at this point, you were, I presume that before that, you were already familiar with the process of deer stalking and venison and
not in the slightest. I'm the only person in my family who does any kind of like hunting related stuff at all. So very much kind of out with my sort of family kind of area of expertise. I mean, before that, I was brought up vegetarian, so kind of as far removed as you could get. So I started eating meat maybe about a year before that, kind of very much homegrown stuff and stuff produced by friends. But yeah, like I said, I wanted to do the field to fork. I think if I'm going to eat meat, I want to see the process through myself, know that I could. So yeah, it was kind of journey of discovery on a whole range of ways, but quite an interesting way into it, really. I've kind of had a few interesting educational experiences
along the way.
Yes, absolutely. Whenever you're kind of new into something, there's going to be one or two of those. But no, on the whole, it's been a really, really interesting little adventure.
How does the deer situation in Scotland look like right now? Like from your point of view, like is it good? Is it bad? Is it overall like a 1,000 meters view of a deer situation in Scotland, and then we kind of dive deeper into.
Okay, that's it's interesting, I think, is the way to put it. It's certainly keeping me busy at work. I mean, my role at the moment is sort of involved in deer management policy. So, we had this review into Scottish deer management a couple of years ago, carried out by a sort of committee selected by Scottish Government. They then looked at all aspects of deer management across Scotland and then made recommendations on how it can change. So part of my work's now kind of being responsible for or being involved in making some of those recommendations become reality. So that's kind of, it's interesting. I mean, there's this figure bandied about that there's 1 million deer in Scotland. I'm kind of skeptical whenever somebody says yes, this is a definite number. Just it's my nature to be to be a little bit cautious when somebody says this is the answer. But I suppose for kind of in terms of a political kind of sense, it's probably quite useful to have a number to work with. So I mean, in terms of sort of upland deer management, which is what most people are familiar with, stalking red deer in the Highlands, it's had a massive change in terms of how it's carried out and who carries it out and why in the last few years. I mean, historically, it was very much kind of, well, I mean, going right back, that there were a lot of people living in rural areas who were very hungry. So there was a lot of deer, got eaten for that reason. A lot of rural Scotland was then cleared to make way for sheep farming, which meant your rural population disappeared and that pressure, that, human predation pressure disappeared. But the deer were then competing, any deer that were there were competing with sheep. And then over time, as the sheep have removed from the hill, deer numbers have gone up. So it's kind of one of those things. But then in the last 20 years, about in the upland sort of context, despite the numbers of deer being high, and in some areas they are very high, in some areas they are very low. So it's kind of quite a mixed picture. In recent years, despite that kind of grazing pressure from livestock being taken off, the numbers have remained pretty static. So it's quite neat. We've got about sort of in the uplands, I think the sort of figures around 400, 450,000 sort of deer in the uplands that we know of. The more interesting bit for me at this point is now looking at the lowland picture, sort of urban edge, farmland, agricultural areas. That's where the sort of interesting bit now is going to start happening in deer management, because in the uplands, like it or not, we have kind of the big estates, big areas with one or two landowners or land managers, which means that you can generally get quite a cohesive sort of management objective and management sort of style over quite a big area. Down in the lowlands, that's going to be a really interesting challenge. Trying to actually get people to work together, many of whom might not want to have any shooting at all. or might not want to admit how many deer they've got on their land, or might not know how many deer they've got on their land. They might be quite surprised they've got deer on their land. I think that's going to be the really interesting bit now going forward in terms of like my work and in terms of just general picture of deer management across the country.
Is the deer management objective set per landowner or per permit? Because you said like, we can have a cohesive land management on a large area because that area is owned by one landowner. So in my view, not in my view, but my question is like, what does it matter? Because if you're setting up a certain rules or objective for management, I would imagine how I understand deer management is like, or regardless if on that land there's like 1 or 5 or 50 landowners, the management is the same. So how does that work that this even matters?
So like I said, in the uplands, what we've got at the moment is our deer management groups. So it's kind of within a kind of a catchment kind of size area, maybe a river catchment size area, maybe a little bit smaller depending on kind of the scale of land holdings within that. So then all the landowners or land managers within that area will sit around a table. They'll probably have a few arguments and disagreements because not everyone's going to want to do the same thing. You might have someone who wants to do full out blanket cull, to achieve woodland regeneration for a rewilding mission, and someone else right next door to them who might want to do traditional upland hill stalking. So there's lots of different things like that, on the go. Somebody else next door to them might want to be kind of in the middle and do a little bit of planting here and a little bit of hill stalking there. Someone else might want to do, not want any deer because it competes with their sheep farm. It's kind of that kind of thing. But what we're looking at increasingly is kind of because we've got this climate crisis and biodiversity crisis is kind of improving habitat quality. So whether that's sort of reforestation or peatland restoration, they're the kind of two big ones, just because of the sort of systems they offer across the board in terms of like carbon storage and capture and habitat for other species and water storage and all that sort of good stuff. So it's kind of making sure deer numbers are at a level that doesn't either stops damaging those areas or doesn't begin to damage those areas. So that's kind of the main thing. But then obviously people have got livelihoods, they've got staff, they've got stalkers and who need to be paid. And, it's kind of a balancing act between making sure you're ticking those ecological boxes, but also making sure that your rural economics stack up, So yeah, it's kind of a balancing act. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with in terms of like managing large areas of land. But then if you're most deer management groups might have about a maximum of kind of 20 involved parties. If you're down in the lowlands, an equivalent area might have 150. So it's kind of, that's the difficulty I think that we're going to face.
And do they all need to agree on the call plan or on deer numbers, or is it like one can decide they're gonna just wipe all the deer on their property, and the other one's like, oh no, I like the deer. You can give me some.
Ideally, and it does make life so much easier, they will all kind of come to some really nice agreement where, everybody's aims and objectives are taken into account. There's a bit of compromise and it's all very lovely. And then everybody has a nice sort of, sit down and a cup of tea afterwards. And we all just give each other a big group hug. Yeah, that's the ideal. That very often doesn't happen. And I mean, yeah, there's a lot of kind of, deer's one of those things that has become a bit of a proxy for a whole range of kind of big P political and small p political kind of things, whether it's kind of interpersonal politics or wider kind of land ownership, land use politics. Deer have become a kind of proxy for a lot of things. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting one to deal with.
was there an element of kind of disillusionment when you came from, like, oh, is it gonna be this lovely deer and wilderness and we're gonna do this cool stuff, and then you found yourself at some point in the middle of politics, really?
I think that kind of dawned on me like relatively quickly how political it was. It's not been like a massive shock to the system, but sometimes it still takes you aback, like how political it can be, and how much like you think, oh God, we're dealing with like a pandemic and World War III and all the rest of this stuff, and like in the global scheme of things, guys, this really doesn't matter. You have days like that. I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely days like that. So it's, but yeah, you kind of have to push through those days. I mean, it's the nature of kind of anything to do with kind of like wildlife management is always going to be pretty political, pretty emotive. People are always going to feel pretty strongly about it, whether they're for it or against it, because there's a lot of identity tied up in that stuff. We've both on Twitter, we both know, a lot of people sort of set their entire kind of brand by their worldviews.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it feels like this takes precedence over common sense and over like sometimes even decency.
Totally.
It's like, yeah, I'm gonna carry this flag forward and
exactly. I don't care who is standing in my way. Exactly. No. So yeah. I think because I had that kind of slightly different coming into the sector. Coming at it from a sort of like a moral, ethical kind of food kind of related direction. There was already that kind of arguments and discussions going on in the circle that I was in. But then, you come into it and you go, wow, there really is a lot of politics going on here.
Yeah, that's, I think, an unfortunate fact of life, and especially when you talk about land management and land ownership, and there's money involved in that, and
totally.
Probably. So Megan, would you agree or disagree? I don't know how to frame the question. How to frame the question so it's not going to come across as a loaded question. But I heard an opinion, right? I put it this way: I heard an opinion that overall, the welfare of deer in Scotland is really poor because they're overpopulated. There's so many of them, and therefore because obviously, and this is how I kind of first time with, even probably that was even before I started the podcast, when I learned that the environmentalists, let's call them this way, environmentalists in Scotland, want to kill all the deer because the forest needs to regenerate and all these, because deer eats forest, and it was like shock to me. I didn't know any better. It was like, wow, because environmentalists was usually in my head people who are against killing poor deer, right? And then in Scotland, they all want to kill it. You say, oh, this is so. I think it was like the first time when I was like, oh, there's more complex issues than that, right? So this is how I get to that, and then I talk with different people, and I heard this opinion like, oh, there's too many deer in Scotland, which you may elaborate in a second, whether, because I presume there are different opinions on that as well.
Yeah.
And therefore, the deer that is in Scotland, there's poor welfare standards because they're, either don't have enough to eat or they cannot display their natural behaviors and So I'm just curious about your comments, because you're very close to this.
I think that there's definitely some areas where that probably is the case, where the numbers have been historically too high, and if you could go to some areas and look at the ground, and it's hammered, it's well overgrazed. Whether that's a result of like current deer numbers or historic pressure from sheep that have been on the ground, like intensively grazed for a period of time, and then as they've been taken off, the deer numbers might have come up. The ground's never got a rest. So there's a lot of kind of debate around impact and overgrazing. That's a whole other issue for someone like Kathy, who you've had on here. That's her kind of ecology kind of area of expertise. But no, there's definitely areas where it is pretty tired, and there are probably too many deer. And that doesn't do them any favours. And I do kind of look at some areas and think, well, yeah, a little bit of woodland here wouldn't actually go amiss. They're woodland edge animals. They like open space, but they do like having somewhere to curry up out of the worst of the weather. They're bloody tough, but maybe they need a break sometimes. So I think this it's why I get kind of a bit grumpy with a lot of this kind of rewilding kind of viewpoint that we need to kill all the deer kind of thing, because it's not everybody does. I'm not generalizing, but at the end of the day, a bit of woodland will actually benefit this species. I also think that the idea that we need to shoot them all in order for the forest to come back, and then all the deer will just wander from the trees and it'll be wonderful. I also think that's a load of hooey as well. I have a real issue with simplistic messaging. I think there's far too much of it, and it doesn't do anyone any favors.
All right, I know another one. Let's cut loose some wolves. They're gonna sort out deers in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, right?
Don't even go there. I know enough people in countries that have got wolves that have got increasing deer populations to know that the wolves, they do their thing. They'll pick off the odd one or two, but they don't do active habitat reduction. They don't see themselves. They're kind of more like, I don't know, kind of the bin men of nature. If they get a chance to have something fresh, then cool, they will. But at the end of the day, I mean, they don't get to go to the vets if they get hurt. They've got to make life choices. 3, it's a big deal. They've got to make good life choices, and if they get hurt or kicked by a hind, which hurts, anybody who's done any kind of close at work with deer knows that these animals are seriously strong, even the little ones. If you're a predator, you don't put yourself in the way of harm. So the idea that they're going to go out and okay, we need to remove however many so we've got 1 million deer in Scotland. We need to remove how many 100,000? How many bloody wolves would that take, and how long? Logically, it just doesn't make any sense. I could just go off on one. I think it's the most ridiculous kind of reason for introducing wolves. By all means, say we want wolves because we think they'll look cool, and we used to have them here, and whatever, they'll reduce campers in the Highlands, and then cool, fine, whatever, make that argument, but don't bring the sort of deer reduction into it. I just think that's just
I know.
Nonsense.
No, I'm glad you're kind of elaborated on this, because I and it goes to this simplistic views, right? Like someone said, like, "Oh, we have this many deer, and look at the overgrazing." And then there's always ones who types the post or tweet and said, like, "Oh, introduce wolves," right? Like, "Oh, sure, that will
Every
solve the
time.
problem."
Every
Every
time,
time,
like clockwork.
that will solve the problem.
Needs more wolves, and you're like, it doesn't. It doesn't. They won't solve anything. You've got so many bloody issues before we even get to wolves.
Yeah, I think mostly these are people who never seen a wolf and probably never seen a deer, and never mind,
never,
you know, how they interact, and you know, how does it, like you said, like, you know, wolf will think twice or three times before they take out like a big massive
completely.
deer.
And you've got the argument that they'll keep them moving around, you know, that they'll, you know, stop them setting an area and being displaced. But that also then means for anybody who is managing them human-wise, I mean, you can see in areas where deer are pushed by people, you know, if they're like have people out morning, noon and night shooting at them. Mm-hmm. You can see areas where deer are extremely unhappy, and they, you know, you get one shot and then they run 40 kilometers. Like you can't deal with that. That's unmanageable at that point. And what you end up getting, I know there's a couple of areas where that was the case in Scotland, and it's crazy because I mean some areas like you sort of call well-managed herds, you'll have your females will heft to an area, and that's about 5 kilometers, and they stick there. Stags will come to them. Stags roam about 20 or so kilometers on average. But you know what you're dealing with, and you've got kind of fairly steady, static, calm populations of animals. And like I said, then you've got these other herds that you get maybe one shot at, and they're just gone. Which is like, that's a nightmare in terms of actually reducing population. If we accept that, okay, maybe wolves do have a role, we're still going to need human intervention. Well, if they're moving around all the time because they're freaked out and being chased, then your management stuff's completely out the window. I don't know. I just find the whole kind of, well, they'll solve everything really bloody irritating.
I agree. like you said, like say it like it is.
There's so much more to it.
Yeah, they're cool. It will be cool to have a wolf around, and it'll be cool to see them through the binos and so on. But that's not.
If they stop dirty camping in the sort of all around the tourist hotspots, then great. By all means, you said that was the sales reason. I would be all for it. People pooping at the roadside will be getting scared. I could go with that. Wouldn't mind that. But,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
And listen, do how accurate are the numbers? So, one of the bugbears of mine is, like, for example, in Ireland, we don't know how many deers we have. There was no deer census and all that. So how does it look in Scotland? Do you have like a reliable number how many deers are in Scotland, or is it like, is there like a every year census and the number is like, yeah, it's a fairly solid best available science? Or is it like, finger in the air, like, I think it's a plus minus 25%?
Kind of a bit of everything you just said. I mean, there's like a rolling program of aerial deer counts. So a team will go up in a helicopter. This is like for open range stuff. And this is what I'm saying. The open range stuff, we kind of know what we're dealing with. We've got a good handle on. You have open space. You can see the deer. That's the main kind of key feature. You know what you've got. You know what you're working with. So there'll be a rolling program of deer counting. And a team from some of the guys I work with will go up and spend a few weeks every year flying around. They'll see maybe a group of deer. They take a photo. They can then log it on the map, and then go back and count. Right, okay, that photo ID. They go back and count it when they get back to the office. Right, that we had 2 stags and 15 hinds in that area. Cool, right? Next one. So that's kind of the government involvement in the counting process. Estates will also do their own counts. So they'll do, like spring recruitment counts, see what's made it through the winter, basically. They then know what they're dealing with. And then after the hinds have all had calves, kind of pretty much just before the season, a lot of people will then go out and do sort of another count and get an idea of, how many calves have been born. And you can kind of adjust your figures on what you're going to cull for that year. If everything's had a calf, then you maybe need to put a little bit of pressure on. If a lot of stuff didn't make it through the previous winter, then you might want to hold back. Again, it depends on what you want to do management wise. If you're looking at having a kind of sustainable population for sort of client stalking, then you need a certain number of hinds, a certain number of stags, a certain number of calves. You kind of, to have a pretty stable population. You're going to shoot 20 stags, that kind of thing. And then those figures will be reported to the deer management group. And then the deer management group will then, again, feed back to government. So that might tie in then with, so colleagues of mine will then gather that information back, and we can see how that reflects with the counts that are done, with the helicopters. There are other methods, so like, dung counting and, sort of using that as a method of getting an idea of how often deer are using a place. And, I think the problem with all kind of census stuff is that it's kind of a snapshot. It's kind of.
But I mean, it's
snapshot on the day. It's handy. It gives you an idea.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it's pretty.
But if you've got a north wind blowing for like a week, then any deer that would have been on that north side of the face have cleared off and are sitting in the lee on the south side, which might be the next door neighbour. So one estate might look like they've got nothing, and one might look like they're absolutely swamped. So it's kind of, there's a little bit of.
But then you're talking about like a density really distribution rather than the numbers. But exactly. The numbers will always kind of come back fairly. Exactly. Wow, that's interesting.
So there's the kind of idea that there's 1 million deer in Scotland. That's the kind of figure that's being used. But I mean, yeah, how much of that is kind of when we don't really know what we're dealing with in the lowlands across like all of Scotland? That's the bit that's a bit more challenging.
What's the percentage with Highland versus Scotland, versus lowland?
About 60-40, I think, something like that. It's over 50% are classed as like upland, moorland.
Okay. So it's roughly half and half, 60%.
Yeah, about that.
Again, so you also do like a guiding hunters.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of relaxing relief job after all the politics and after all the difficult stuff? Then you go like, I'm just gonna do some fun work.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes. You didn't wonder about the answer to that question.
No. There's a kind of like a simplicity and kind of, it's like straightforward honesty about like stalking deer. You can go out onto the hill and you can't really think about anything else. You're kind of, especially if you're going to do it well and have a good day with the client and give them a good experience, then you've kind of got to be 100% there. And at the end of the day, I mean, everybody sort of goes, you're using high-powered rifles, that's not very fair. Why don't you do it with sticks and stones? But you think, well, it's just nonsense, which is just freaking nonsense. But
I just like at this point the term high-powered rifle, like what would you expect? Would you expect them shooting them with 22s?
It's a low-powered rifle. Like, exactly.
And it goes to that point that I think that these days, like anyone who wants to stress that something is bad, they're gonna use this high-powered. It's like, they're using high-powered boats when it comes to fishing. Like, wow. Yeah, what do you mean, like turbine engine boats, or like what are the high powered boats? But and then high powered bows, like okay, so
okay. To me, if you're actually out and you're using a high powered, rifle or bow or something like that to hunt, then actually your chances of being successful are that much better, because there comes a point where that would be absurd and you're using a cannon, but it's kind of
that's my point, right?
But it's kind of within the realms of like common sense. Actually me using the best tools for the job kind of means that it's probably going to be a quicker, cleaner, more effective operational round.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's a similar thing like with the wolves, that people who using this argument of high-powered rifle, they didn't spend minute thinking about what does it actually mean. Mm-hmm. It's just a term.
They just heard a term.
It's meant to mean something, and they just like slap it and like.
My favorite other one is trained marksman. Deer should only be shot by trained marksmen.
Yes, right. Thank you. Trained. Yes, exactly. They should go through the military
school.
Marine sniper school before they shoot the deer. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that's not a guarantee that anyone is going to have any idea. I mean, it's like this. Like, it's my head in. There's like a lot of guys we have out who do, they might do a lot of target shooting, and they can hit a target at 100 meters, 200 meters, and 300 meters. Isn't that great? And then you put a live animal in front of them, and they turn into jelly, and they just can't.
Mm-hmm.
They can't
Buck
even.
Fever.
Buck fever, exactly. It's got a name, for God's sake. It's well known, And these are guys who might be like professional kind of people who've been in the army and all the rest of it doesn't. There's no guarantee that they're actually going to do the job.
I mean, but even like this trained marksman thing is like, you know, saying like, oh, everybody who gets in the car needs to be trained race car driver. Like no, you're not expecting someone go to like 2-year driving course when they, you know, learn to corner and do all these things to get in the car, right? You just, and the same, like, why would you go through the trained marksman course if you want to shoot a deer? Like,
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
So let's talk about deer stalking, like a more relaxing subject. And
yeah, definitely.
Any advice? So someone like me, or you know, who kind of hunts deer wherever way they live, you know, Ireland or maybe in UK, but not in Scotland, or maybe somewhere in Europe, and they want to go to Scotland, shoot a deer in the Highlands, which is this big. So, what advice would you give that person? Like, where to start? How to, you know, like, let's go from the very basics, like how to start, how to find a place where to go, when to go, you know, how to prepare, all those things.
Okay. I mean,
where to start?
yeah, big question. I suppose, I mean, if you're wanting to start doing stuff like recreationally yourself, we're a kind of disadvantage to our kind of American counterparts in that we don't really have any access to public land. So, you know, whereas a lot of folks there can, you know, get a license or put in for a tag or whatever, and then just head out into the hills, into public land areas and, you know, shoot their shot kind of thing. We don't have that same opportunity. So a lot of people will get their first taste of deer stalking through, you know, either being like fortunate like I was to go out with a friend, or to they might have to, you know, buy stalking, or kind of, you know, there's various auctions people can bid in and win a deer stalking somewhere, and, you know, it'll be something like that people get their first kind of opportunity, but it's usually kind of something they've got to pay for generally. I mean, everybody gets really excited about stalking stags in the Highlands, in the Rut. That's kind of like seen as kind of the primo stalking experience, and it is in the global context. I've had guys that say it was Scotland or Alaska, and we came here, and it's been amazing. You know, it's kind of, yeah, when it's done well, it's an amazing experience. But in terms of actually like going out and just stalking a deer, then I think, or, you know, whether you want to actually stalk or sit in a high seat, you know, because I mean, some people.
No, but I even mean from the perspective, you know, like probably going with the outfitter, or with, you know, like whatever the term is, is a way to go for the first time, right?
Pretty much. That's pretty much what people have to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in terms of like your experience before that, I mean, most people, well, you know, they've got a range of people who come, people who've never shot anything before in their life, not even shot at a target, to people who've shot, you know, multiple deer. It's just kind of, I think as long as you kind of a willingness to learn and you made some effort to educate yourself before you go, then that's kind of a good thing. It's just good form, really, actually. Regardless of what you're doing, you don't want to go in completely novice. And then, yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, everybody gets excited about the red stag experience. But to be honest, I mean, I find like going down to England and sort of, you know, stalking muntjacks really interesting and exciting, because it's something totally different to what I do up here. You know, winter rose stalking for does. I mean, again, if you're looking at sort of like not spending an absolute bloody fortune to go and do it, there's quite a few options. I mean, people would spend more on a season ticket to go and watch football. You know, it is seen as quite a sort of elite activity, because people see one particular kind of, you know, the landed gentry going out and stalking stags. But actually, there's a lot of options out there, and it's kind of, yeah, it'd be quite good for people to be more aware of that. And actually, in terms of like, we get a lot of guys who come up to Scotland to go and stalk deer, and you're kind of like, yeah, but, you know, we're going to help you out with the Scottish hind cull, and we're kind of like, yeah, but you've got so many fallow does down in England, it's actually shocking. Why are you coming up here? We should be going down and helping you sometimes. So I'm like, oh my god, you know, it's kind of interesting, like the perception around like Scottish versus English deer management as well. I think that's kind of, just as an aside, completely quite an interesting kind of interesting one. But Yeah, yeah. It's like I said, we're at a disadvantage and we don't have that access to public land.
What is the like how much money are you talking about when someone wants to go for deer stalking holidays to Scotland?
Mm. To be honest, it really depends on the place. I mean, there's a few places that if you're wanting to shoot kind of like trophy animals, then yeah, you can be charged a fortune, and that's the same anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's always going to be people that have got money to spend. That's just the way of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you might, I don't know, someone might spend £1,000 to shoot a really nice stag, but then for a week's hind stalking, they might spend £500 for a whole week. So it's that kind of difference in experience. It just depends on where you are and what you're doing. Or some places will charge a day rate, and some people charge a week. It's kind of.
It depends on the outfitter.
It just depends on the outfitter and the people they work with. So there's kind of no hard and fast rule. And I think the main thing is kind of shop around, and sort of, it is one of those sectors there's a lot of like reputation and kind of thing. So it's always worth actually shopping around and just asking about, because it's just the nature of these things.
And asking people who already were with.
Exactly.
Done that before,
Exactly.
and like what was your experience?
Totally.
What is the time of the year? What is the best time of the year?
I mean, in Scotland, roe deer are in season all year round, either males or females. So,
really?
Yep. So you can always stalk one or the other. So bucks start on the 1st of April and does finish on the 31st. So it's kind of, you can basically hit from one season to the other. Folks like the challenge of hind stalking, because the weather is just can be that much more inclement. Although if it's like really, really bad, we won't go out, because you get guys turning up saying, well, I've got all the gear, let's go. And it's absolutely lashing rain and blowing a gale and snow and sleet. And like, well, let's go out then, we're here. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but it's no good for the deer to be chasing them around, And like, yeah, but I've got all my waterproof kit on. I say, well, okay, you strip down to your boxers and then we'll go out. Oh, I'm not doing that. Well, that's what you're asking the deer to do. They don't have an option, So it's kind of, yeah. But it's definitely a more challenging time of year. For pure excitement, like I said, the red deer rut is quite something. There's if you get the chance to go somewhere where you've got the stags roaring all around you and you can watch them chasing and holding hinds, and that is exciting. That's kind of September, October. Yeah, September, October time. And if you want a bit of a challenge and you aren't bothered about, taking home the skull and the antlers, then some guys will go out stalking in the summer, sort of in August, where they've still got velvet on their antlers. Just and that's when the stags are at their best sort of meat quality, is kind of July, August. So.
Oh, really? Well, that's an important.
Definitely.
For those who like for whom the real trophy is the meat.
Exactly.
So you have a better weather and better meat. What's not to like?
Exactly. Well, once they get into the rut, they get pretty gamey.
Yeah.
Just
all the hormones and everything.
Totally.
Totally.
So apparently there's quite a sort of strong German market for rutting stags. That's where apparently a lot of stuff goes, because a lot of it goes into sort of cured sausages and things. So the strong taste is not a bad thing, apparently. So I'm reliably informed.
Oh, right.
There's not anything wrong with the meat. It's just a very strong taste, and I think for the sort of quite sort of often tame British palate, it's probably a bit much.
Yeah, like this is some. I don't remember who said it, but someone said it like you go in, you weather the elements, you weather this, you do this, you grab the deer, and then you cannot eat because it tastes right. Like, come on, you can weather. There's a little bit of a gamey meat, but I totally agree. I couldn't imagine. I just physically cannot imagine of having shot an animal and processed the animal, and then I taste it. It's like, oh, it doesn't taste like it's a protein.
I know.
So okay, so we got, and usually for the traveling hunters, are they bringing their own rifles with them from wherever they travel, or is it option to get the rifle whenever they go, or is it depending?
Pretty much every estate I know will have people use their rifle. I mean, like we have clients that'll turn up and, they maybe want to use their own rifle, and that's fine. But we're now using non-lead ammunition, just because of the kind of management contract that the estate was on. And a lot of guys who've got, like, say, forestry contracts, they're on non-lead, and an increasing number of people are switching to it. And, that's, yeah, it is what it is. It does the job. But if you're kind of obliged to do that because of your contract, you can't really then have people turn up with, shooting lead from their own rifles. So
yeah, but this is just an ammunition. But
yeah.
I'm saying.
So, but yeah, guys can take their own rifle as long as they're kind of happy to shoot non-lead ammunition. But I mean, to be honest, it is just a lot easier to use estate rifles. You don't have to worry about it. That's my point. Yeah, it's just way easier just to come over, just yourselves, bit of outdoor kit, and there's always stress about it.
There's always like a little bit like with when you go in, like whether you're going hunting or fishing, there's this thing like on one hand you would like to use your own rifle, your own rod, but on the other hand, especially when you're traveling by air or something,
totally.
all the permissions, everything, and then this is not exactly a piece of gear that is easy to handle.
Exactly.
So it might be okay. So my question was more aimed at whether the gun laws in Scotland even allow such.
Yeah, no, you've got to have a sponsor. I think you've got to have someone who can sort of sponsor you to come to say, yes, you are, you're a client, you're safe, you've got. But I mean, that's something like your agent would sort out if you book through an agent. So
yeah, exactly. So when you're going through the outfitter or agent, then that's
they'll advise on what needs to happen. So, but genuinely, I mean, if I travel anywhere, I'll just use the rifles out of there.
That's easier.
It's just so much easier and less stressful.
True, especially in the travel.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, how does the aspect of the physical fitness look like? How do you often faced with a situation when you have clients that are just like, all right, we're going to go up that hill, and they go like, what?
From time to time. I mean, you adjust your stalking to suit. I mean, it's kind of again, that's the advantage of having like sort of like, say, kind of well managed deer. You kind of know where they're hefted to. You know where you've got options. Basically, you're not reliant on walking around until something happens to kind of stand still in front of you long enough. So I mean, we had an older guy out this last season, and he went out with a colleague who marched him over a hill and dale because he was like, I have a sore knee, and our colleague was like, yeah, well, I had an ankle operation, so that's fine. Well, all the old guys will go out together, and marched him around the place, and this old guy was just absolutely knackered. He could barely function. So he came out with me the next day. He was like, I want to have an easy day. So we managed to find him a stag that was like, sort of 2,000 steps or something on the sort of pedometer. It was like, as opposed to like sort of 25,000. It was kind of, right, okay. And he was like, that wasn't long enough. I would like a longer day. Right, okay. So eventually managed to get quite a nice sort of technical kind of stalk, and managed to work around a whole heap of deer and got close to some others. And it was a really good day. And we got back to the car, and I was like, looked at my watch, because he was like, oh, I'm so tired. And I was like, 7,000 steps, it's fine. And he's like, oh, okay. That was kind of in the middle. I said, yeah, it was.
Jeez, I didn't even, yeah. I'm getting like, when you're like, this is a fun thing that when you talk with the guides, whether fishing guides or hunting guides, the type of stories and the type of like people you deal with, like, oh, that was too long. No, that was too short. Like,
I know.
It's just like in the
we want the Goldilocks day. Everything is just right. Like you're hunting. It right. Doesn't work like that. It really doesn't.
And so, are there the situations where you just have to go so I'm just wondering, like, how much this is dictated with like what you do, what you have to do, and how much this is dictated of like, oh, this guy wants to challenge and want to hike up and down the hills, and this guy just want to go and squeeze one, and how does that work?
I mean, at the end of the day, like, the main thing to keep in mind is we are there to do a job. We're there to reduce numbers. So that's kind of got to be the primary objective. You still then want to have a good day for the client, so they feel like they've been part of the process, not just like dragged around. which is like the worst side of things when you sort of like stomp around after a guide. They don't really speak to you all day. You get plopped down behind a rifle, take a shot,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you just, all you've done is like kind of wander around, press a button and go home,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So it's kind of, it's got to be all that kind of feedback into the day. Unfortunately, it is one of those things where you do get people who just want to go and shoot stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, they are very few and far between. They often come up for the hind season because they think they're just going to get a chance to like rattle away and shoot a heap of things, which is kind of not great. And we've had, I mean, in the sort of 6 years, I've had maybe 2 people like that, you know, and yeah, they're just dicks. Quite frankly, they're just, you know, they're assholes. But they unfortunately exist in every sector of society. So, you know, they're going to be there. They're going to crop up from time to time. But no, I mean, you know, it's, like I said, you can tailor the day to suit the client and what kind of they're looking for. And, you know, there's a certain degree of kind of, there's a certain degree of maneuverability in what you can do and when and how. But there's also going to be days when it just doesn't work out. And we'd rather kind of walk away from it at that point and try again tomorrow than try and like hash on into the hours of darkness, you know, for the sake of like, we're going to do it. And everybody just leaves disappointed and tired and cold. You think, right, okay, we're about to call it quits. We'll have another go.
But, you know, I guess like minus the injuries and, you know, old age and all that.
Yeah.
You know, is there, just to have a good experience, just to have a, you know, like a fun day, and, you know, when you need to hike up a hill, you're going to hike up a hill and so on.
Yeah.
Is the, you know, like a average, you know, hunter fitness level of the average hunter enough for that? Or would you say like definitely, you know, get on the treadmill or get onto the gym, you know, 6 months before to have an optimal experience? So this is where I'm kind of...
I think if you're kind of going kind of West Coast stalking in particular, which is like a lot of vertical ground, then being a little bit fit is not the worst thing in the world. You know, get on the step counter kind of thing. But and just, you know, you'll have a better day yourself if you're not absolutely knackered. I mean, there is a part of it, you know, the guiding experience when you have, like I said, you take account of what your client is obviously capable of doing or not, and adjust to suit. Because, you know, the worst thing in the world is following a guide who, like, and a lot of the young guys do this because I don't know if they're kind of not interested or maybe nervous about speaking to folks, but we'll absolutely race off up the hill and they've got a guy in his 60s sort of puffing away trying to keep up with them, you know, kind of, you know, who just wants to have a good time at the end of the day. I mean, you're there to enjoy yourselves. I've got an older friend. He's in his 70s. He still comes out in ghillies, and he says that to me because we're going to go out one time, and it started to rain. He said, to be honest, he says, I'm here to enjoy myself these days. You know, I don't feel the need to get cold, wet, and miserable anymore. And I thought, you know, that's kind of, you've got to view it to a certain extent. You know, I can get cold, wet, and miserable, but if I don't have to, then I really don't want to. And it's the same with the fitness. You know, if I don't have to be knackered, then I'll do everything I can not to be. So yeah, I think a little bit of prep does no harm. But at the same time, there's an element of the guide's got to actually sort of
Gotcha.
not
So you
just
just
leg
need to be
people
in a
around.
reasonable good shape, but you not necessarily need to run 100 miles in the mountains.
No, God, no, nothing like that. You can if you want. I mean, no one will think any the worse of you for it. But yeah, just, you know, as long as you can get up
like if my very first stalking experience when I didn't know, like literally the first time I call up the guy, the gentleman who runs a fishing lodge, he actually turned out to know the guy who you know is guiding hunters, and I said, hey, can you know, it was like a few years ago, and he rang him up, and the guy was like in his 70s. And the first question he asked, like, "Oh, is he fit?" because he was, even though he was in the 70s, he was so fit, and he was so, you know, so he didn't want somebody like dragging behind. It was like a first question. So, but like I said, it's good to know that this is not sort of a,
it's not an
hunt that you need to do it before you get too old for it.
No, totally. And like I said, there's lots of different options for different people and different skills and different abilities. I mean, like, you know, if you're happy to have an experience where you want to, sit in a high seat, and sit and watch what's going on around you. Because I like obviously stalk hunting, but for me, like sitting in a high seat, like down south, is a really nice experience because it's somewhere totally different. Looking at different species. Like muntjac and fallow, for example. You get to see them moving through the wood and a whole range of other things. So yeah, and you don't have to be massively physically fit for that, obviously. So yeah, there's lots of options, and I think it's like not to sort of cut yourself off from it because you feel you might not be able to. I think that's one of the important things, like, and getting new people in. It's kind of I think it's easy looking at the sort of mountain man Instagram to think that everybody's got to be some sort of like ex-Navy SEAL to try and sort of like go hunting in the mountains, but carry the deer off on your shoulders kind of thing.
Yes. Doesn't count. Otherwise, it doesn't count.
No, exactly. It's a kind of like weirdly elitist kind of thing with some of it, but no, you don't need any of that stuff. It's quite possible to have quite a good experience and a nice day and a sort of educational time.
Yeah, I like that you said. It's probably the major part of the experience is to talk to your guide. Like I said, not just follow steps. It's like, here now, shoot this one, and done. Go back home.
Exactly.
It's all the banter and all the things that you learned while you're in the process.
If I take my clients out, I'll let them know why we're looking for this stag. What are we looking for when we look at a stag? We've seen 10 stags this morning. Why this one? What is the characteristics here that we're looking for in him? Is it age profile or antler shape or body quality or all these sort of things? And then you're discussing how he fits in with the herd and his role and the females and the calves and what you're choosing to do with the land. And there's so much to it. And I think, like I said, a good guide will kind of involve you in that process because you're there for the day, or a week. You want something out of it. So,
is there a big issue to bring the meat with you then outside of into the EU, because now you need to bring them?
Yeah, I think it's more of an issue now that we've done the Brexit thing. That definitely, I think, makes things harder. There's probably lots of forms to fill out.
Yeah, but it was like a typical, like people were bringing meat with them.
Yeah, some people would. Yeah, some people would. Either like buy it locally or whatever. They'd sort of speak to the game dealer and take stuff. Or get it sent out, sort of thing. So that's been done before. But I think Brexit's made all that stuff way harder. It's probably like 17 forms to fill in and various colors of ink.
Well, worst comes to worst, you just stay put until you eat the whole deer, and then you go back.
And then you go home weighing an extra 3 stone, but very happy with yourself.
There you go. I have my deer on me.
How was your holiday? Great. I had to roll me out the door.
Oh, this is Megan. Is there anything else to be stalker in someone who wants to go on shooting holidays is there anything else that I didn't ask you but they need to know about?
I don't think so. I think it was kind of the main basics was kind of, like educate yourself first, get, a little bit of fitness, but don't be put off by any of the kind of preconceived notions of what it means to go, on a stalking holiday, and shop around, at the end of the day. It's like anything. You wouldn't just pick the first holiday that, the travel agent gives you.
That's the main takeaway. No, it's I actually thought before I was talking with you that the, physical aspect is more important, that you need to be really, up to the job of hiking up and down the hills, but you kind of like you're reassuring in that. The
thing is like there's different areas of Scotland that, like here it's very flat and a lot of blanket bog, so it's not so much vertical hunting where you're walking and stalking kind of thing, or walking up lots of hills, but the final approach might be 200 yards of crawling, like belly crawling through a wet peat bog. So it's kind of, it depends on what experience you want. We had a guy turn up with his son and he went stalking with a colleague, and they spotted the stag, stalked in as close as they could get whilst walking upright. And then I think the son was going to shoot, and the dad was going to then crawl in behind and sort of like be there for the moment kind of thing once they were all set up. And my colleague said to them, right, we're gonna crawl forward now. We're gonna crawl hands and knees, and then when I belly crawl, you belly crawl behind me in a line, single file, the whole thing. And the guy's like looking at him going, that's a really long way. And he's like, yeah. He said, I'm in the Navy. And he's like, yeah. He said, I didn't join the Army, so I didn't have to do things like this. It's really funny. But yeah, they did it and they got soaking wet and were delighted with themselves, and it was all very nice. But yeah. So it's different experiences for different places.
What are the average shot that you're taking? Is it 200 yards, 300 yards?
Ideally 100 meters. That's kind of like the ideal. But I mean, between 100 and 200 is kind of anything within that range is considered kind of all right.
You're not taking like a miraculous 500-yard shots or anything.
No, and anybody who sort of says that, you should be taking shots like that isn't worth the time of day, quite honestly. I mean, I've heard a couple of sort of horror stories of people being put in that situation. It's like their first stag and, shooting a deer at sort of like, 400 meters. And that's just horrible, because they're under pressure and then something goes wrong. And if it's wounded, then it buggers off. Then they've got to chase it up. And whereas at least like, because I've got a couple of friends who've started stalking and we're talking about this. And I said at the end of the day, if you start as close as you can, if anything goes wrong, and not saying it will, but if anything does go wrong, you've maximized your distance that you've got to safely shoot out to and comfortably shoot out to. If you start at like 200 and it runs out to 4, then you've got a big issue. If it starts at 100 and it runs out to 2, then you've got a lot of leeway. If you start at 400 and it runs off, then it's half a kilometer away by that point. So it's yeah.
And many people don't even take shots, this long. I mean,
exactly.
Unless you're in some sort of a long range shooting league or something, then
exactly
you probably
there's no need for that sort of stuff, really.
So it's not like you're debunking some things for me even because my imagination was that it's much more demanding physically, and you're probably going to be taking longer shots but you say 100 meters is pretty much
for most people I know who are taking clients out, 100 150 is kind of where it's at. If you've got a client out, and it's stalking at the end of the day. The whole point is to get close to the animal. Otherwise it's just kind of throwing bullets at something, hoping something lands. It's so yeah, it's it's not to say like you shouldn't be fit and you shouldn't have a bit of practice before you go and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, I wouldn't let it stop me from like going on a stalking holiday, whether that's, like I said, upland red deer or lowland fallow.
You're maximizing your chances and you're getting better experience in the end. Listen, exactly. just to one other subject that I'm sure you're gonna love it, but I have to rewilding, the R word. Yeah. How the whole movement and how the whole thing, because it's a lot of people talking about it, and this is like a thing it's the thing that's now, right? And everybody have their own idea of what rewilding is and so on. Like how these conversations, impacting your work, either your work in terms of deer management, or even, maybe as a hunting guide. I don't know if they do, if they don't. So I'm just curious, like, how does it look like from the perspective where you sit and also what are your views on it?
I think rewilding is one of those things that you could put, like 10 people in a room and say, what's your opinion? And you'll have 20 opinions. It's kind of, there are so many different views. I think like I said earlier, I don't object to some of the fundamental principles, like sort of the idea of like self-willed land to a certain extent, and a little bit of more woodland cover in a lot of places wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and just in terms of species benefit, and as well as all the other stuff. So I'm kind of, in principle, not hostile to the idea and to what it's trying to achieve. I think my kind of reservations on it come from being someone living and working in a rural area. And so you get some of the purists who kind of get the feeling that there shouldn't be anybody living and working in rural areas. You know, like they just shouldn't be there. It should be just left to go back to nature, which is nice, but not going to happen. So I think there's got to be a bit of realism about the discussions, and I think a lot of the unhappiness from the rural sector comes from that kind of whether it's meant as an attack or it's just perceived as an attack on their sort of identity and their, a lot of people say, first and foremost, yeah, I'm a hunter, I'm a farmer, I'm a whatever. There's identity tied up into that stuff. And I think like people who are coming in saying, what you're doing is shit and you're trashing the landscape and this way is the best way, basically devalues what people have worked for, their families have worked for, and their communities have worked for generations. So I can understand a lot of the unhappiness and uneasiness that surrounding it, despite some of the potential benefits that come from it. So, like I said, not hostile to the idea, but it's got to be done in a way that's like sympathetic to folks who are already here.
It's almost like a term itself is tainted. It's almost like my point was like maybe we stop using word rewilding because first of all people don't people understand different things.
Yeah.
And there's always like, oh, but these are like, corridors and predators and whatever. Like, okay, that's
exactly.
fine. But there's carnivores and corridors and whatever. But like you said, like, what are the principles? Like, what are we trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
Why we need to put this label that makes people agitated, right? It's like, exactly. Trophy hunting. Like, just stop using it. Like, why you insist of using it, right? It's exactly. Like, I'm a vegan. Like, you're this, like, no, right? If you just eat whatever you want to eat, nobody cares. But then you put this label on, and some people get agitated about it. And I think that with rewilding is the same thing. And I think it's a great pity that, at least where I sit, like people that I know and I respect their points of view greatly, they insist of like, we need to use this word rewilding. Like, no, like maybe it's better just not use the word.
Yeah. Or
because
find sort of ways for the terms that because I think like rewilding, like I said, for some people it means large carnivores. For some people it means, bison behind a fence. For some people it means beavers in every stream. For others it means a little bit of woodland on sort of woodland soils, and kind of encouraging that. So it's a really kind of broad church. I don't know whether there's a sort of like mix of sort of folks saying, well, mine is the only true definition of rewilding. It's kind of like, it's like any kind of like belief system. You're always going to have schisms, and splits, and people are going to go off and do their own thing. And I think maybe like picking bits out of like that, for some of the things that you want to achieve might be a better way to do it rather than just labeling everything as like blanket rewilding. I think that some of the principles are good. I think the sort of PR campaign has been great for the general public, but pretty toxic for a lot of people who work rurally. And if you're going to have anything that takes part in rural areas, you're going to, unless you're planning a sort of, extermination campaign, which wouldn't really go down very well, you kind of need to take rural people with you. Because they're a lot of the ones, I've had this discussion with people like through work and, taken it quite a long way when I've said it, that, okay, we've got a biodiversity crisis and you want to have, tree planting and peatlands and all this stuff. Well, the people you need on your side are the guys and girls who are, shooting the deer, managing the deer. Excluding them or pretending that you can do it without them isn't going to benefit anybody. And actually making sure that they're, well looked after, well supported and paid a decent wage might actually be the way to ensure that you get a lot of these things done. Mm-hmm. Whereas, I know a lot of like young folks in the sector, in the deer management sector in particular, find it bloody hard to find year-on-year employment because a lot of it's sort of contract work for a season and then you're kind of left kicking your heels. Or there's kind of, some of the places could be, whether it's an estate or a company, can be a bit exploitative. Same with conservation, to be fair. There's, kind of piss poor wages in that sort of sector as well. But if we're going to have people coming in, and we know like how much of an issue it is keeping people employed rurally, whether it's in agriculture or fruit picking or whatever, we need to make sure these jobs are valued. And I think that's kind of my thing with rewilding is a lot of the stuff they actually want to achieve, especially if they want to reduce deer numbers to allow this stuff to happen. You need folks to do it, and there needs to be collaboration for it to happen.
When I talk with people who are really seriously deep into rewilding, they're in 9 cases out of 10, they're talking reasonable things, and they appreciate, need for rural people, and I think that where the problem is that these organizations kind of, well, they need finance, they need people, they need members, and so on, and then their messaging to support kind of tends to recruit people of like, oh, hunting is bad, and
hunting is bad, we need wolves.
Yeah, and I think that this is a huge problem that where a lot of environmental NGOs haven't dealt with, that they're kind of supported by the people who are not 100%, and then they seems like they cannot even say the things that they want to say, because then some of their members will feel like a betrayed, disenfranchised, and this creates like a not healthy connection between the two.
Totally. And I don't know what the answer is to that, to be honest, because it's like it's almost reached that point where you can see that in the sort of political process as much as anything else, or any, like globally, the sort of like, to use the phrase, but the fake news phenomenon and all that side of things, that kind of, it is a very real thing where, folks are self-selecting their own media, and companies and NGOs and whoever very much tailor it to suit based on what response they might get on social media. It's really weird. I don't know at what point that switch was, but it's not a massively healthy one. I mean, like, we both chat with people who are involved in like sort of the trophy hunting debate kind of, and it's a vast and complex issue, but simplified very often down to, it's bad, I don't like it, we should just shoot the people that do it because it's da-da-da-da-da. And like, I don't know how you then get to the point where those folks would be up for an actual conversation. I think they're like so far gone down a particular road. It's the same as like, anti-vaxxers or whoever else. It's kind of, there's these wormholes of information and disinformation. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to resolve.
I think this is what you said earlier, that this is becoming part of an identity.
Totally.
And when something becomes part of your identity, that's done. That's, that person is done with conversation, because then, they're not going to change their mind on something if that something is their very identity. It's really hard. It's
totally.
It's really hard. I don't know the good answers to that as well,
No, but it's like, it's a massive kind of, I think just in terms of like sensible discussion on land use and like land management, or lack of land management, if that's what you're into, to have those actual sensible discussions. And like I said, about the deer management side of things, the collaboration, and perhaps a little bit of like the dirty word compromise, to try and get to that point when folks are then very entrenched. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I think like the more the conversations like this happening,
definitely,
maybe like 1 or 2 people who listen to that will say like, oh yeah, actually.
Well, that's why I've been always quite like vocal and kind of made an effort to talk about deer management, because I think like even when I started, it was kind of a mystery. There was some stuff, but it was still kind of quite almost like a dark art that happened, and it was kind of, I've always been very much like, the more people that know about this stuff, the better. And the more people, are aware of the hows and the whys, the better. And if it's, regardless of whether it's me or somebody else speaking about it, it's got to be a good thing, as long as it's matter of fact, kind of, we do X because of Y, and this is how we do it. And it's just tackling some of that kind of disinformation that fills the void for lack of information. If people don't have a clear picture of what's happened, they'll make their own narrative up. So you've got to provide them with a good, clear, understanding of everything. So yeah, I think that's probably the only way you can do it, and hope that enough of that kind of percolates through to sensible folks.
yeah And there's also aspect of it, how many of shouting people really matter, like because at the end of the day, things are happening on the ground.
Totally.
That's where the change is made. So um, it's a question, how many of those people who are on the ground and doing stuff are worried or impacted by the shouting ones.
I think the thing is, you've got a relatively, it's like, and I'm sure it's true of pretty much everything, you've got like quite a vocal minority at either end of a spectrum of people, and a lot of folks haver around in the middle, and they'll move one way or the other depending on whatever the mood takes them, basically. But I think you will have, like you said, that those identity kind of positions where people have kind of, whether they're right or wrong and anything about what they're talking about is another altogether.
Yeah. Oh.
But that's where they kind of sit, and then, like I said, most people kind of sit somewhere in between the two. And I think that's, as long as you're never going to change the minds of folks sitting at either end of the spectrum. You've got to like talk to people in the middle who aren't quite as vocal. I think that's going to be the only way you can do it. And like I said, stuff like this helps, and giving people a chance to have questions answered is, quite a good thing.
Listen, how do you think the future of deer in Scotland will unfold? How do you see, from the perspective of trends, how the situation looked like when you started, how it looks like now, and where the trajectory goes, whether the rewilding movement, or however you want to call it, will impact that, and if so, in what way? So how do you see the situation changed in 10, 20 years from now?
That's a tricky one. That's kind of very much like future casting.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like, based on the trends that you see.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it could go in a number of ways, really. I mean, I think one of the things is for me, and this is just like stuff we've talked about, through just personal and work, is like the actual cost it would achieve, the actual financial cost of achieving what a lot of people are discussing in terms of like population reduction of deer and maintenance of that reduction. Because it's all very well to like, shoot them out once, that's fine, but they will come back. They breed every year. All the ones that are left don't stop reproducing. So it's kind of
30%, right?
Depends on the environment, because I mean, in some areas, like say in the uplands, in a bad year, it might be 20%. In your lowlands and agricultural areas where they've got access to year-round winter grazing, 80% recruitment's not unusual.
You're kidding me?
Genuinely.
80%.
I've got a friend who stalks down south, and he has shot 250 fallow deer, and this last winter, and every single doe was pregnant, bar one, I think he said. One old doe that didn't have offspring on the way. So it very much varies depending on, and I think that's the thing with like to be aware of, is as we're creating better habitat for deer, which all these woodlands will do, their well-being and welfare will improve as they have access to better feeding and better shelter. So their fecundity and their reproduction will increase. So it's all these kind of little variables and things that I think are going to make for a very interesting time. I don't think I could say like what they'll do, sort of population-wise, but I think as well, like it's not easy managing deer on the open hill, but it's a damn sight easier managing deer on the open hill than it is in a wild woodland.
Yes.
Or even a grazed woodland, That's
interesting point, because you're saying essentially, okay, reduce the deer, plant the woodland, and now your deer will explode again. So
you'll suddenly have perfect habitat for them to, both reproduce and evade you.
Yeah. We were better off without all those damn trees.
Exactly. Good hill fire, that's what you need. Don't record that.
Oh God.
No. But so it's, I really don't know what the answer is in terms of what the future's going to be, but I think it's definitely going to be, there'll be some surprises, definitely, because like nothing in nature does what people want it to do. Nature hasn't read the human playbook. She really doesn't give it. She really doesn't
Nature
give a
will
damn.
find a way.
Absolutely, life will find a way. No, I don't know. I think you could end up with populations in the uplands being probably reduced further, but populations in the lowlands just doing their thing, rocketing away.
Right.
Or lowlands or kind of upland areas that have been planted. But that, we just get some wolves, that'll sort it out.
Yeah, they sorted out. Some wolves and wild
A
cats.
couple of lynx and, maybe a bear or two. That'd be
Yeah, I would love to. Bear is like by far my favorite. Apparently, there's less conflict with bear than with wolves.
Yeah, I could believe it to a certain extent, but
yeah, because they're not like 100% carnivores, right?
Yeah,
like a bear can go into cow mode and just eat grass and stuff and
berries and things. They're pretty cool. They're pretty
Listen,
cool.
one last thing. Do you see any impact on deer, both on deer biology, deer behavior, but also on the when it comes to stalking deer with the climate change and like do you see any impacts on like a drier summer?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like we've had a couple of springs that have been dry, and that definitely checks their body condition because you don't get that initial burst of vegetation. So, they don't get the hinds with that final push in the pregnancy, the final kind of period of pregnancy. It's that much more pressure on them if they don't get good grazing in the spring and early summer. So that's definitely had an impact on both them and the success of their calves, because if they're not getting good grazing or they're in a drought in the summer, obviously they can't produce as much milk. So that definitely has a knock-on impact. And then wetter, more miserable winters. We don't get sort of like cold, dry, snowy winter anymore. It's very often like,
yes,
we had that. What year was it? Was it the Beast from the East year?
2 years
we
ago?
had it was a few years ago. We had like 70 days of rain non-stop. It rained every day for 70 days. There's a guy with a weather station along the road, so he's kind of looking at it going, Jesus. So yeah, I think that's that side of things, and that sort of weather drags animals down. If they can't dry their backs and they're just using up all their energy just to stay warm. So yeah, no, I think it definitely has an effect. But again, like I said, get some more woodlands in, resolve that issue.
Yeah, simple solution. Listen, Megan, just one more thing that now when you were talking about the hinds and all that, which is again controversial one, but we're here to just tackle all the controversial subjects.
Yeah, let's go for it.
You got all your disclaimers before that.
Yeah.
So I heard a lot of complaints really from stalkers, from deer managers about. Yeah. Now, I'm going to butcher that, so you can correct me on that, but about extending hind shooting season into February and March.
Yeah.
And then the argument was on that they're heavy pregnant and that this is inhumane and this is sickening for hunters and so on.
Yeah.
I heard also another view on this, also from deer manager, that like whether you shoot the hind, whether you shoot that hind in December or January or in March, it's equally pregnant. So like there's no at least no ethical considerations. So I wonder again, like as someone who's like very deep and close and this is your day to day, what are your views on this?
I think the main thing about, I don't like it. I don't think it's particularly nice, like shooting heavily pregnant hinds. But that is definitely, it is more of a human discomfort thing at that point. I mean, you shoot the hind, the calf dies. It's until it is born, it is reliant on its mother. Or unless you're catching it in the very last few hours before it's born. So it's kind of distasteful. But like you say, it's pregnant at one point, it's pregnant at the next. It's kind of, you're still, it's still shooting 2 for 1 kind of thing.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's probably more of an issue shooting hinds, starting the season earlier in the year. So, normally we start October 21st, after the stags finish. starting earlier than that, then you have got the risk of like orphaning and leaving highly dependent young. And I think that's probably more of an issue than shooting hinds later into the year when they're heavily pregnant. So, because I mean, so much of a deer's life and well-being is dependent on its mother. I don't like folks like are aware of how much, because I mean, they're a matriarchal herd, especially looking at a hind group. So it may be a lot of, mothers, sisters, aunties, half sisters, whatever. And a calf, whether it's a male or a female, is very much dependent on its mum's place in that family group for where he gets grazing or how often she gets fed or whatever. So yeah, it's I've got more of an issue with probably orphaning kind of more dependent calves than I do with shooting heavily pregnant females.
No, for sure. Now when you said it, that's for sure. All right, listen, Megan, thank you so much for that. That was I learned a lot, and surely listeners and viewers learned a lot as well. Are there any words of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Be curious, be questioning, all that sort of stuff.
How people can find you? You have a fantastic blog, website, and like I said on the top of the show, you have a strong social media presence.
Yeah.
How people can get in touch and follow what you do?
Yeah, so my sort of website blog is Wayfaring and Wandering. Just Google that and it should come up. I don't update my blogs often as I used to, but the odd stuff goes on it, so maybe just whatever.
There's just a lot of stuff there. I was browsing the other day. There's a lot of interesting stuff on this blog.
So. Thank you. And then on Twitter, I'm at Wayfaring Hind, and then on Instagram, I can't remember what my username is actually. I think it's Wayfaring_Hind, but just search my name and it'll come up.
There's always these underscores and things that we do at the beginning, and then I was like, what was it that?
Totally. Don't get me started on passwords.
Definitely recommend it. Folks, give Megan a follow, and I'm going to put the links in the description of the show. Megan, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks, Tommy. It's been good.